Imagine sacrificing your flawless career to marry a poor, struggling intern just to fulfill his dying grandmother's final wish. Now, imagine walking into a police station in handcuffs, only to see your poor husband wearing a bespoke suit, commanding a fleet of elite lawyers, and revealing he's actually a $10 billion CEO. Clara thought she was saving a humble family. She had no idea she was just a pawn in a billionaire's ruthless corporate game, and she was about to make him regret it. The panoramic glass windows of Vance Global Law, Manhattan's most feared corporate firm, filtered the afternoon sun into a harsh glare across the Italian marble floors. To the outside world, this skyscraper was an impenetrable fortress. To Josephine Vance, the billionaire chairwoman, it was a hunting ground. Dressed in a faded janitorial uniform, her silver hair tucked beneath a frayed cap, Josephine pushed a squeaky cart down the 50th floor. She could bankrupt a rival CEO with a single phone call, yet right now she was entirely invisible. For 3 months, highly classified files regarding a multi-billion-dollar merger had leaked to their fiercest rival. Josephine knew the corporate spy operated at the highest levels. To catch a thief who hid behind custom suits and Ivy League degrees, she had to become someone they would never look twice at. She paused near the corner office, eyeing her prime suspect, Morgan Sterling. A rising senior partner, Morgan was a vision of weaponized wealth, draped in a white Tom Ford suit, holding an iced matcha latte. "Watch where you're pushing that filthy thing." Morgan's shrill voice shattered the quiet corridor. She purposefully bumped her shoulder against the cleaning cart. The sudden jolt sent a splash of green liquid flying from her cup, splattering directly onto Josephine's worn canvas shoes and leaving a puddle on the immaculate floor. "I apologize, miss," Josephine said, keeping her head bowed. The cart caught on the rug. "I don't pay you to speak," Morgan snapped. She wanted an audience, and her voice easily drew the attention of passing junior associates. "Do you have any idea how much the shoes you just breathed on cost? More than you make in a decade scrubbing toilets. Clean it up. Get on your knees and wipe the floor before someone important sees this mess." Josephine remained silent. Her blood boiled, not from humiliation, but from the glaring confirmation of the toxic rot infecting her firm. She slowly reached for a rag, testing to see if anyone in this billion-dollar corporation had the spine to intervene. "Leave her alone, Morgan." The voice was calm and melodic, yet laced with a razor-sharp authority that instantly dropped the temperature in the corridor. Clara Hayes stepped into the golden light of the hallway. She wasn't a fragile, naive junior associate. Clara was a brilliant senior attorney in her late 20s. Dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal blazer, she possessed a striking, mature elegance and an undefeated courtroom record. Clara walked with the poised confidence of a woman who knew her exact worth. Morgan rolled her eyes, crossing her arms defensively. "Save the bleeding heart routine for the courtroom, Clara. The cleaner made a mess. I'm telling her to do her job. You spilled your drink because you were too busy looking at your phone," Clara stated unflinchingly. Without breaking eye contact, Clara pulled a pristine white silk handkerchief from her pocket and calmly crouched down. With a few swift motions, she wiped the spilled matcha off the floor herself, right at Morgan's designer-clad feet. The corridor let out a collective gasp. The sheer humility and quiet power of the gesture were staggering. "What on earth are you doing?" Morgan stepped back, her face flushing with deep embarrassment as she realized the optics had violently shifted against her. "Taking responsibility," Clara said. She stood up smoothly, dropping the ruined silk into the trash. "This firm was built on integrity, Morgan. If you need to humiliate a working-class woman to feel powerful, you're a disgrace. Apologize to her." Morgan scoffed, her manufactured confidence crumbling under Clara's unwavering stare. "You're pathetic. Let's see if that high horse saves your career during the partner reviews. You just made a dangerous enemy." "I prefer my enemies to be dangerous," Clara replied coldly. "It makes beating them more satisfying." Morgan let out a frustrated sound, spun on her heels, and stormed off, slamming her glass door behind her. As the lingering associates quickly dispersed, the fierce tension bled from Clara's shoulders. She turned to the older woman, her sharp demeanor melting into a warm, genuine smile. "Are you all right, ma'am? Please don't let her get to you. Some people wear their bank accounts because they have absolutely nothing else of value." Josephine looked up, meeting Clara's eyes. Behind the grime and the disguise, the chairwoman's mind raced. In a sea of corporate sharks and potential spies, she had just found someone with unbreakable integrity. "I am perfectly fine, my dear." Josephine softened, dropping the timid act just a fraction. "Thank you. You have a very brave heart for a corporate lawyer." "Just keeping the scales balanced." Clara smiled gently, adjusting the case files in her arms. "If anyone gives you trouble again, you come find me. I'm Clara Hayes." "I will remember that, Clara. Have a wonderful day." As Clara walked away down the corridor, a calculating smirk played on Josephine's lips. Clara Hayes wasn't just the uncompromising lawyer to help her root out the corporate spy. She was exactly the kind of strong, independent woman her grandson needed. Julian Vance, the elusive young billionaire who had just secretly assumed the role of CEO, was set to enter the firm on Monday. But he wouldn't be walking in wearing a bespoke suit. To truly understand the company's rot, Julian was coming in under the guise of a lowly legal intern. Josephine gripped her cleaning cart. The undercover game had officially begun, and the perfect pieces were finally falling into place. Julian stepped off the crowded elevator onto the 50th floor of Vance Global, acutely aware of the itchy, off-the-rack polyester suit clinging to his shoulders. As the billionaire's CEO, who had spent the last 5 years expanding the family empire from London, his usual attire consisted of bespoke Savile Row tailoring. But today, he wasn't Julian Vance, the ruthless corporate titan. Today, he was Julian Reed, a fresh-faced, struggling legal intern. His grandmother's instructions had been crystal clear. Find the leak, protect the innocent, and whatever you do, don't blow your cover. "You must be the new intern," a voice called out. Julian turned and found himself looking into the striking, intelligent eyes of Clara Hayes. She stood near the reception desk, a stack of thick legal briefs resting effortlessly in her arms. She exuded a quiet, commanding confidence that instantly intrigued him. "Julian Reed," he said, offering a warm, practiced smile. "I was told to report to Miss Hayes." "That would be me," Clara replied, returning his smile with a professional but genuine warmth. She handed him half the files. "Welcome to the Lion's Den, Julian. Rule number 1, the coffee machine in the break room is broken, so use the one on the 49th floor. Rule number 2, if Morgan Sterling asks you to do anything, get it in writing. She has a habit of throwing interns under the bus when a deadline is missed." Julian raised an eyebrow, genuinely impressed. Most senior attorneys treated interns like invisible furniture. Clara was different. "Noted. And rule number 3? Always read the fine print," Clara said, her eyes flashing with a sharp, analytical light. "Follow me. We have a mountain of case law to review for the upcoming tech merger." Over the next 2 weeks, Julian found himself entirely captivated by Clara Hayes. In the boardroom, she was a force of nature, brilliant, methodical, and unyielding. But in the quiet moments of late-night case preparations, she was kind witty and surprisingly grounded. Julian, forgetting his disguise on a few occasions, would casually point out complex loopholes in corporate tax laws that no ordinary intern would ever notice. Instead of being threatened, Clara was delighted. "You've got a brilliant legal mind, Julian," she told him one evening, sharing a box of cheap takeout in her cramped office. "If you keep this up, you won't be an intern for long." Julian looked at her, the neon city lights reflecting in her eyes, and felt a strange, unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He was a billionaire who could have anyone, yet he found himself dreading the day he would have to lie to the woman sitting across from him. Meanwhile, deep in the shadows of the firm, Josephine Vance was running out of time. While cleaning Morgan Sterling's office, the undercover chairwoman had noticed something chilling. Morgan had left a decrypted flash drive on her desk for a mere 30 seconds. It was enough time for Josephine to see the file names. Morgan wasn't just stealing data to sell to their rivals. She was actively planting false metadata trails to frame Clara for the corporate espionage. Josephine knew she couldn't simply fire Morgan yet. She needed hard proof of the buyer to dismantle the rival firm entirely. But if Morgan pulled the trigger on her frame-up, Clara would go to prison. Josephine needed an ironclad way to protect Clara, to legally bind her to the Vance family's immense resources and protection before the trap snapped shut. She needed a wedding. The following Friday, Clara received a frantic phone call from Julian. His grandmother, the kindly janitor she had defended weeks ago, had collapsed and was in the hospital. Clara dropped everything and rushed to the small, modest clinic Josephine had arranged. She found the old woman lying in a sterile bed, looking incredibly frail, her face pale and her breathing shallow. Julian sat beside her, looking genuinely distraught, though his anxiety was mostly due to how convincingly his grandmother was acting. "Josephine," Clara said softly, approaching the bed and taking the old woman's wrinkled hand. "I came as soon as Julian called." "Clara, my dear," Josephine coughed weakly, a masterful performance worthy of an Oscar. "I am so glad you are here. The doctors, they say my heart is failing. I don't have much time left." Clara's eyes welled with tears. "Don't say that. There must be something they can do. Treatments, surgeries." "No, child," Josephine interrupted gently, squeezing Clara's hand. She looked over at Julian, her eyes full of faux sorrow. "My only regret is leaving my grandson all alone in this cold world. He works so hard, but he has no one, no family, no money." Josephine turned her gaze back to Clara, her voice dropping to a desperate, pleading whisper. "Clara, I have seen the way you two look at each other. You are strong, you are good. My dying wish is to know he will be taken care of. Marry him, Clara. Please, let me see my boy settled before I close my eyes for good." Clara froze, her heart pounding against her ribs. She looked at Julian. He looked equally stunned, though he quickly masked it, playing along with his grandmother's intense emotional blackmail. "Grandma, you can't ask her that," Julian said, his voice thick with feigned hesitation. "It's too much." "Please," Josephine rasped, closing her eyes dramatically. "It is all an old woman wants." Clara looked at the monitor, then at Julian. Despite his cheap suits and lowly status at the firm, he had been her anchor over the past few weeks. He was brilliant, protective, and respectful. And Josephine. Clara couldn't bear to let the sweet old woman die with a broken heart. It defied all logic. But the corporate world had taught Clara that tomorrow was never guaranteed. "Okay," Clara whispered, the words slipping out before her rational mind could stop it. "Okay, Josephine, I will." 2 days later, in a quiet, unadorned room at the city courthouse, Clara Hayes and Julian Reed stood before a judge. There were no billionaire press corps, no designer gowns, and no diamond rings. Clara wore a simple white sundress, and Julian wore a clean but modest suit. As they exchanged their vows, Julian looked into Clara's eyes and felt a sudden, terrifying wave of guilt. She was marrying an intern out of pure compassion and a blossoming, genuine love. She had no idea she had just legally bound herself to the CEO of Vance Global, a man worth $10 billion. "I pronounce you husband and wife," the judge declared. Julian leaned in and kissed her. It was supposed to be a strategic move, a fake marriage to grant her spousal immunity and family protection. But as their lips met, the contract vanished from his mind. The kiss was real. They agreed to keep the marriage an absolute secret at the office to avoid violating the firm's strict fraternization policies. On Monday morning, Clara walked into Vance Global as the sharp, unyielding senior attorney, and Julian walked in right behind her as the invisible intern. But the clock was ticking. Morgan Sterling was finalizing her trap, and the deadly game of corporate chess was about to explode into the light. Morgan Sterling did not become a senior partner at Vance Global by being unobservant. She was a predator in stilettos, surviving on a diet of corporate secrets and human weakness. And on a rainy Tuesday evening, she found the ultimate secret sitting right in the intern bullpens. It started with a watch. Julian had been rolling up the sleeves of his cheap polyester shirt to fix a jammed printer. For a fraction of a second, his cuff slipped, revealing the timepiece on his wrist. It wasn't the knockoff Casio he usually wore. It was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, a bespoke masterpiece worth over $2 million. Morgan had frozen, her sharp eyes locking onto the intricate dial. A lowly intern with a $2 million watch. Her mind raced. She retreated to her corner office and immediately pulled up the Forbes top billionaires list. She cross-referenced the elusive, rarely photographed Josephine Vance with the security badge photo of Julian Reed. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. The sharp jawline, the piercing eyes, the commanding aura he tried so hard to suppress. Julian Reed was Julian Vance. The billionaire CEO was hiding in his own company. A wicked, triumphant smile spread across Morgan's crimson lips. Her original plan had been simple. Leak the firm's confidential merger files to a rival company for a $10 million payout, and frame the self-righteous Clara Hayes for the crime. But now, $10 million was pocket change. If she could seduce Julian Vance, get pregnant, or manipulate him into marriage, she wouldn't just get a payout. She would own the entire Vance empire. Morgan's fingers flew across her encrypted keyboard. She had to accelerate her timeline. She finalized the forged digital trail, carefully placing Clara's IP address on the leaked offshore bank transfers. Then, she drafted an anonymous, untraceable email to the FBI's white-collar crime division. The trap is set, Morgan thought, closing her laptop. Now, for the prize. At 8 p.m., the 50th floor was mostly deserted. Clara was in the archives on the 42nd floor, pulling case precedents. Julian was alone in the main conference room, massaging his temples as he reviewed a mountain of contracts. The heavy glass door clicked shut, and the deadbolt slid into place. Julian looked up to see Morgan Sterling leaning against the frosted glass. She had discarded her blazer. Her white silk blouse was unbuttoned dangerously low, and she looked at him with a predatory, calculated hunger. "Morgan," Julian said, his voice dropping into the cold, authoritative tone he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. He forgot his intern persona entirely. "What are you doing?" "The door." "Working late, Julian?" she purred, walking slowly toward the mahogany table. "Or should I call you Mr. Vance?" Julian's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. His cover was blown. But before he could formulate a response, Morgan rounded the table and stepped directly into his personal space. "Don't worry, your secret is safe with me," she whispered, reaching out to trace the lapel of his cheap suit jacket. "Actually, I think it's brilliant. A billionaire playing among the peasants. It must be so exhausting, pretending to be small when you own the world. You need someone who understands you, someone on your level." Julian grabbed her wrist, his grip like a vice, forcefully removing her hand from his chest. "I don't know what game you're playing, Morgan, but you're going to back away right now, or you won't just be fired. You'll be ruined." "Oh, I love it when you drop the act," Morgan breathed, completely unfazed by his threat. In a lightning-fast, desperate move, Morgan grabbed the collar of her own silk blouse and violently ripped it downward, tearing the delicate fabric and popping the buttons across the room. She threw her arms around Julian's neck, pressing her half-bare chest against him, her manicured nails digging into his shoulders. "Yeah, get off me!" Julian roared, violently shoving her backward. But Morgan's timing was terrifyingly perfect. Just as she threw herself at him, the conference room door handle rattled. A second later, Clara unlocked it with her master key and pushed the door open, a stack of files in her arms. Clara froze. The files slipped from her grasp, scattering across the marble floor like dead leaves. The optics were damning. Morgan was breathing heavily, her blouse torn open, her lipstick smudged, standing mere inches from Julian. And Julian, her secret husband, the sweet, humble intern she had vowed to protect just days ago, was standing there. His suit jacket wrinkled, his face flushed with adrenaline. "Clara!" Julian gasped, stepping forward, his heart plummeting into his stomach. "Clara, stop. It isn't what it looks like. She forced herself on me." "Oh, Clara, I'm so sorry," Morgan interrupted, her voice suddenly trembling with fake tears as she clutched her torn blouse. She looked at Julian with faux betrayal. "Julian, you said we were alone. You said she wouldn't be back." "Shut up!" Julian snarled at Morgan, his billionaire wrath finally unleashed. He turned back to his wife, his eyes pleading. "Clara, please, you have to believe me." Clara stood perfectly still. As a lawyer, she was trained to analyze facts, not emotions. But the physical pain in her chest was blinding. The man she had just married, the man she had opened her heavily guarded heart to, was in a locked room with her worst enemy. But before Clara could even process the betrayal, the elevator banks down the hall dinged in unison. Heavy, synchronized footsteps echoed rapidly down the corridor. 6 men in dark windbreakers emblazoned with the yellow letters FBI stormed onto the 50th floor. "Clara Hayes?" the lead agent barked, flashing a badge as he stepped into the conference room. Clara blinked, the whiplash of the moment disorienting her. "Yes, I am Clara Hayes. You are under arrest for corporate espionage, wire fraud, and the theft of highly classified trade secrets," the agent said, his voice echoing brutally against the glass walls. 2 agents flanked her, immediately grabbing her wrists and pulling them behind her back. The cold bite of steel handcuffs snapped around Clara's wrists. "What?" Julian shouted, lunging forward. "Get your hands off her. She hasn't done anything." "Back off, son," an agent warned, placing a heavy hand on his weapon. "We have IP logs and offshore bank statements with her digital signature. She's looking at 20 years in federal prison." Clara didn't fight the agents. She didn't scream or cry. Her brilliant mind was connecting the dots with terrifying speed. The leaked files, Morgan's smug, triumphant face in the background, and Julian, the intern who was suddenly commanding the room with the authority of a king. She looked at Julian, her eyes devoid of the warmth they had shared just hours ago. Now, They were shards of absolute ice. "Clara, I will fix this," Julian said desperately, his voice breaking. "I promise you, I will burn this city to the ground to get you out. I am Julian Vance. I own this firm. I will save you." The confession hung in the air. Julian Vance. Clara let out a hollow, bitter laugh. Her husband wasn't a struggling intern. He was the billionaire CEO. The sweet old lady in the hospital was a lie. Her marriage was a lie. And now she was taking the fall for a crime she didn't commit, all while standing inside the empire of a man who had deceived her from the very first hello. "You don't need to save me, Mr. Vance," Clara said coldly as the federal agents dragged her toward the elevators. "Because when I get out of this, you are the first person I'm going to destroy." The FBI holding cell was a sterile, windowless concrete box that smelled of stale coffee and ozone. For 3 agonizing hours, Clara Hayes sat on a bolted metal bench, her posture perfectly straight, her mind working with terrifying precision. She wasn't panicked. She was a senior corporate attorney. She knew the law. She mentally mapped out Morgan Sterling's forged IP logs, the offshore routing numbers, and the timeline of the leaked merger files. But beneath her calm exterior, a violent storm of betrayal raged. Julian Vance. The name echoed in her head like a death knell. The sweet, brilliant intern who had shared cheap takeout in her office. The man she had stood before a judge with, exchanging vows to grant a dying grandmother peace. It had all been an elaborate, multi-billion-dollar theatrical production. The heavy steel door suddenly clicked and swung open. It wasn't the arrogant field agents who had arrested her. It was the special agent in charge of the New York division, looking visibly pale and sweating profusely. Behind him stood a team of the city's most ruthless defense attorneys, and stepping through the center of them was Julian. He was entirely unrecognizable. Gone was the slouching posture and the cheap polyester suit. He wore a bespoke, midnight blue Tom Ford suit that clung flawlessly to his broad shoulders. A platinum Patek Philippe gleamed on his wrist. He radiated an aura of absolute, crushing authority, the unmistakable presence of a billionaire CEO who could buy and sell the building they were standing in. "Miss Hayes," the special agent stammered, quickly stepping forward to unlock her handcuffs. "There has been a profound misunderstanding. All charges have been dropped. The evidence against you has been flagged as completely fabricated. You are free to go with apologies from the Bureau." Clara rubbed her chafed wrists, her face an unreadable mask of ice. She didn't look at the agent. She looked directly into Julian's dark, desperate eyes. "Clara," Julian breathed, taking a step toward her, his hand extended. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" Clara slowly stood up. She smoothly bypassed his outstretched hand, treating him as if he were nothing more than a ghost in the room. "I will be leaving now. Do not follow me." She walked past the stunned attorneys and out of the precinct into the cold, driving rain of the Manhattan night. Before she could hail a cab, a sleek, armored Maybach glided to a halt beside her. The rear door opened, and Julian stepped out into the downpour, ignoring the umbrella his driver tried to offer. "Clara, please, just get in the car. Let me explain everything," Julian pleaded, his billionaire composure fracturing. Clara stopped under the glow of a street lamp, the rain soaking her hair and charcoal blazer. She turned to face him, her eyes burning with a fierce, cold fire. "Explain what, Mr. Vance? That your grandmother, Josephine, the poor, dying janitor, is actually the billionaire chairwoman of the board? That you used a legal loophole, our marriage, to grant me spousal privilege so I couldn't be compelled to testify against your empire while you investigated Morgan?" Julian swallowed hard, the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "Yes." We knew Morgan was the spy. We found out she was trying to frame you to take the fall. We needed a way to protect you, to tie you to the Vance family's legal shield before she pulled the trigger. The marriage was the only way to ensure they couldn't touch you. And what about Morgan? Clara's voice was a deadly whisper. Was tearing her blouse open and locking herself in a conference room with my husband, also part of your brilliant corporate strategy. That was a setup. Julian stepped closer, his voice laced with raw desperation. She saw my watch. She figured out who I was. She cornered me, ripped her own shirt, and tried to seduce me to blackmail her way into the Vance fortune. Clara, I swear to God, I never touched her. I love you. Clara let out a hollow, bitter laugh that cut through the sound of the rain. You love me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly before she forced it back into ironclad control. You don't know the first thing about love, Julian. Love requires respect. It requires equality. You didn't marry a partner. You adopted a pawn. I did it to save your life. Julian shouted, his frustration bleeding through. If we hadn't done this, you would be looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary right now. Morgan had you dead to rights. I am a lawyer. Clara fired back, her composure finally cracking as the sheer weight of the humiliation crashed over her. I am Clara Hayes. I have never lost a case. I would have fought Morgan Sterling in court, and I would have destroyed her on my own terms. But you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You thought I was a fragile little damsel in distress who needed a billionaire in shining armor to lie to her, manipulate her, and trap her in a fake marriage to keep her safe. Julian froze. For all his strategic brilliance, for all his billions, he had completely miscalculated the woman standing in front of him. He thought she would be relieved. He thought she would be grateful. He had entirely underestimated her ferocious pride and unbreakable independence. Clara reached into her pocket. She pulled out the simple, unadorned gold wedding band Julian had placed on her finger just days ago. Julian's breath hitched. Clara, don't. My vows were real, Clara said softly, the ice in her voice finally melting into profound, irreversible heartbreak. But you made a mockery of them. She stepped forward and pressed the cold gold ring into his palm, closing his fingers over it. Morgan Sterling has a team of elite defense lawyers. The board will try to bury this scandal. And I am going to sue Morgan, the rival firm, and Vance Global for defamation, wrongful termination, and malicious prosecution. Clara stated, her professional armor sliding back into place. Clara, you don't have the resources to fight this alone. Let me help you. Let me hire the best. I don't want your money, Julian. And I don't want your protection. Clara interrupted, stepping back into the shadows of the rain. Have your legal team send the divorce papers to my new address. I'll represent myself. Julian stood paralyzed on the wet pavement, the golden ring burning a hole in his palm. He had billions of dollars, immense power, and the world at his fingertips. But as he watched Clara Hayes hail a yellow cab and disappear into the night, Julian Vance realized with horrifying clarity that he had just lost the only thing he actually wanted. The neon glow of a flickering street lamp bled through the cracked window of Clara's new office in Brooklyn. It was a far cry from the Italian marble and panoramic views of Vance Global. The space smelled of old paper and cheap coffee, furnished with a single scuffed mahogany desk and a dying ficus plant. It had been 3 weeks since she walked away from Julian in the rain. True to her word, Clara had launched a ferocious legal war. She was representing herself against Morgan Sterling, who had officially defected to Apex Zenith, Vance Global's largest rival. Morgan's new firm was employing a classic corporate starvation tactic. burying Clara under a mountain of frivolous motions and discovery requests to bleed her dry of time and money before they ever saw a judge. Clara rubbed her burning eyes, staring at a forged offshore bank ledger. She was brilliant, but she was only one person fighting a billion-dollar legal machine. A sharp knock echoed through the quiet room. "We're closed," Clara called out without looking up from the ledger. The door opened anyway. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing into cold daggers. Standing in the doorway was Julian. But the Billionaire's CEO was gone. He wore a faded gray Henley shirt, dark jeans, and his hair was unstyled, damp from the evening drizzle. In his arms, he carried 3 massive cardboard boxes overflowing with printed server logs, and in his hands, 2 cups of black coffee from the bodega down the street. "I told your legal team not to contact me outside of official channels," Clara said, her voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "Get out, Julian, before I call the police and add harassment to my lawsuit." Julian didn't flinch. He walked inside, carefully set the coffees on the edge of her desk, and dropped the heavy boxes onto the floor with a loud thud. "I'm not here as the CEO of Vance Global," Julian said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its usual boardroom arrogance. "I resigned this morning." Clara froze, her pen hovering over the paper. "You what?" I stepped down. The board is in an uproar, but my grandmother has assumed interim control, Julian explained, taking a step closer, though he kept a respectful distance. "I realized something after you left, Clara. For my entire life, money and power were my only tools. When Morgan threatened you, I didn't think twice. I orchestrated a grand play to save you because I thought that's what a man with billions of dollars is supposed to do. I tried to be your savior." He looked directly into her eyes, his own filled with a raw, agonizing sincerity. "But you never needed a savior," Julian continued softly. "You needed a partner. You needed respect. I took away your agency, and it was the most arrogant, unforgivable mistake of my life." Clara stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. The anger was still there, but the sheer vulnerability of the man standing before her was disarming. "So, what are you doing here, Julian? Come to watch me lose to Morgan's legal army? I'm here to apply for the unpaid assistant position," Julian said, gesturing to the boxes. Inside those boxes are the raw, unfiltered server logs from Vance Global's IT department. I didn't use my lawyers to get them. I spent the last 3 weeks digging through the code myself. Morgan is smart, but she's not a ghost. I want to help you find the metadata she missed. No billionaire money, no private investigators, just you and me working the case. Clara looked at the boxes, then back at Julian. The exhaustion in his eyes mirrored her own. He wasn't trying to buy her forgiveness. He was trying to earn it the only way she would respect, through hard, unrelenting work. "If you get in my way," Clara warned, her voice losing a fraction of its ice, "I will throw you out." "Understood," Julian nodded, pulling up a cheap folding chair beside her desk. For the next 48 hours, the Brooklyn office became a war room. The dynamic shifted seamlessly back to what had originally drawn them together. They were 2 brilliant, relentless minds, operating in perfect synchronization. They argued over legal precedents, drank terrible coffee, and scoured thousands of lines of digital data. Julian, stripping away his CEO persona, was the perfect paralegal. He anticipated her thoughts, pulling case files before she even asked for them. At 3 a.m. on the second night, Julian suddenly went completely still, his eyes locked on a string of code. "Clara," he whispered, his voice vibrating with adrenaline. "Look at this." Clara leaned over his shoulder, the proximity making her breath hitch for a fraction of a second. Julian pointed to a hidden timestamp embedded deep within the offshore transfer logs Morgan had used to frame Clara. Morgan spoofed your IP address perfectly, Julian explained, his finger tracing the screen. But she forgot about the physical router cache on the 50th floor. This timestamp shows the transfer was initiated from Terminal 4B. That's Morgan's private office. And look at the exact time. Clara's eyes widened. 8:14 p.m. I was in the archives on the 42nd floor. The keycard logs will prove I wasn't even on the same floor when the transfer happened. We got her, Julian breathed, looking up at Clara. For the first time in weeks, a genuine, predatory smile spread across Clara's face. No, I got her. You just handed me the ammunition. 3 days later, in a sterile, heavily guarded arbitration room, Morgan Sterling sat across a polished table, flanked by 3 high-priced lawyers from Apex Zenith. She looked unbearably smug, sipping a glass of sparkling water. Clara sat alone on her side of the table. Julian sat silently in the back row, holding a legal pad, playing the part of the invisible assistant to perfection. Miss Hayes, this is a waste of everyone's time. Morgan sighed, checking her manicured nails. Drop the lawsuit, plead guilty to the corporate espionage, and my clients might convince the DA to be lenient. I don't think so, Morgan, Clara said, her voice dripping with lethal calm. She didn't shout. She simply slid a single, thick folder across the table. You forged the IP logs brilliantly, but you forgot that Vance Global's physical routers cache MAC addresses independent of the mainframe. Morgan's smug smile faltered. She opened the folder. Page 4. Clara instructed coldly. That is a verified log showing the offshore transfer was initiated from your private terminal. Page 7 is the building's keycard data, proving I was 8 floors away at the exact minute the file was sent. And page 12. Clara leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Morgan like a predator. Is an email from the CEO of Apex Zenith to your personal server, offering you $10 million and a senior partnership for Vance Global's merger data. Morgan turned ghost white. The high-priced lawyers beside her immediately stopped taking notes, their faces draining of color as they realized they had just been implicated in federal wire fraud. This is fabricated, Morgan stammered, her hands visibly shaking. The FBI's cyber division is currently authenticating it with a federal warrant, Clara said, standing up and smoothing her blazer. You thought you could destroy my life for a payout. But you made one fatal miscalculation, Morgan. You underestimated me. Clara turned and walked toward the door. As she passed the back row, Julian stood up and opened the door for her, a look of profound, overwhelming awe and respect in his eyes. Morgan Sterling was arrested before she even left the building. Standing on the sidewalk outside the arbitration center, the afternoon sun finally broke through the clouds. Clara turned to Julian. He looked exhausted, wearing the same gray shirt, holding his legal pad. He hadn't tried to steal her thunder. He had stood in the shadows and let her win her own war. You make a surprisingly good assistant, Mr. Vance, Clara said softly. Julian offered a tentative, hopeful smile. Does this mean I'm hired? Clara looked at the man who had given up an empire just to sit in a folding chair and help her fight. The ice around her heart finally shattered. We'll see. Clara smiled, stepping closer. But first, I think the assistant owes his boss a decent cup of coffee. The dust of Morgan Sterling's spectacular downfall had barely settled over Manhattan. But inside Clara's modest Brooklyn office, the silence was deafening. The frantic energy of the past few weeks had evaporated, leaving behind a stark, undeniable reality resting on the center of her mahogany desk. The divorce petition. It was printed on crisp, unyielding legal paper, requiring only 2 signatures to erase the marriage entirely. Clara stood by the window, watching the late afternoon sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the exposed brick walls. Julian was in the corner of the room, quietly organizing the last of the physical case files into neatly labeled boxes. He had spent the entire week honoring her boundaries, operating as her assistant, and sleeping on the uncomfortable faux leather sofa in the waiting area. He hadn't brought up the divorce papers once. He was waiting for her to make the final move. A sleek, black Maybach glided to a silent halt on the street below. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly as the rear door opened. Stepping onto the cracked Brooklyn pavement was not the frail, stooped janitor she had defended weeks ago. It was Josephine Vance in her true form. Dressed in an immaculate, custom-tailored Chanel suit, her silver hair styled flawlessly, she radiated the terrifying gravitational pull of a billionaire matriarch. A moment later, the office door opened. Julian stood up straight, his jaw tightening as his grandmother stepped into the cramped room. Josephine looked around the humble office, her sharp eyes taking in the cheap furniture and the dying ficus plant, before finally resting on Clara. "Mrs. Vance," Clara said, her voice polite but guarded, betraying none of the intimidation most people felt in Josephine's presence. "To what do I owe the pleasure? If you're here for the Vance Global files, Julian has already boxed them up." "I am not here for the files, Clara," Josephine said softly. She didn't carry the arrogance of a CEO. Her shoulders were lowered, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. She walked forward and stopped a few feet from the desk. "I am here to apologize." Clara crossed her arms, her posture stiffening. "You don't owe me an apology for protecting your company, but I owe you one for how I treated your life." Josephine countered, her voice carrying a heavy, undeniable sincerity. "When I realized Morgan was trying to frame you, I saw a strategic opportunity. I looked at you, a brilliant, principled woman, and I saw the perfect shield for my grandson and the perfect weapon against our enemies. I treated your marriage, your trust, and your heart as pieces on a chessboard. It was a ruthless, unforgivable calculus, and I am profoundly sorry." Clara held the older woman's gaze. In the high-stakes corporate world, apologies were usually just legal liabilities. But looking into Josephine's eyes, Clara saw genuine regret. Josephine reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a sleek, encrypted tablet. She set it gently on the desk next to the divorce papers. "Julian told me that you caught Morgan in the conference room. He told me what you saw," Josephine said quietly. "Morgan wiped the local security cameras, but she didn't know that I had installed a secondary, hidden analog feed in that room when the leaks first started. I thought you should see the unedited truth." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Julian, who stood perfectly still, his heart in his eyes. Slowly, Clara reached for the tablet and tapped the screen. The grainy, black and white footage flickered to life. It showed the conference room exactly 3 minutes before Clara had unlocked the door. She watched as Morgan cornered Julian. She watched Julian physically recoil, his face twisted in absolute disgust as he forcefully pushed Morgan away. She watched, with a tightening chest, as Morgan grabbed her own blouse, violently ripped it open, and threw herself at Julian just a split second before the door handle rattled. Clara closed her eyes, letting out a long, trembling breath. The visceral, haunting image of her husband standing over a half-undressed woman, the image that had poisoned her mind and shattered her trust, finally dissolved into ash. He had never betrayed her. "He is a good man, Clara," Josephine whispered. "He loves you. The only fools who deceived you were Morgan and myself. Do not let my arrogance cost him the best thing that has ever happened to this family." With a slow, respectful nod, Josephine turned and walked out of the office, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The room plunged back into silence, save for the hum of the city outside. The golden hour sunlight poured through the window, bathing the office in a cinematic amber glow. Julian took a slow step forward, stopping just at the edge of the desk. He looked down at the divorce papers, then up at Clara. "The board of directors held an emergency vote this morning," Julian said, his voice quiet but steady. "With Morgan in federal custody and Apex Zenith facing indictment, Vance Global's stock is stabilizing. They formally requested that I return and resume my position as CEO." Clara's heart gave a painful thud. "I suppose that means my unpaid assistant is resigning." "I told them no," Julian said, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, unwavering intensity. "I told them I am not coming back. Not the way things were." Clara blinked, stunned. "Julian, you can't abandon your family's legacy. Vance Global is your empire." "It's a broken empire, Clara," Julian countered, stepping around the desk until he was standing just inches from her. "It was built on secrets, paranoia, and ruthless isolation. I spent my whole life sitting on a throne, completely alone, trying to outsmart everyone around me. And it almost cost me you." He reached out, his fingertips gently brushing against the lapel of her charcoal blazer. She didn't pull away. "Vance Global needs a shark to survive the market," Julian continued, his voice dropping to a rough, emotional whisper. "But it also needs a compass. It needs someone with an unbreakable moral spine. Someone who isn't afraid to wipe the floor with senior partners when they forget their humanity." Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out the simple gold wedding band she had returned to him in the rain. He held it between them, a silent question hanging in the golden light. "I don't want a trophy wife. I don't want someone to hide in my shadow," Julian said, his eyes burning with absolute devotion. "I want a partner. I want you to come back with me, not as Mrs. Vance, but as Clara Hayes, co-CEO of Vance Global. Half the voting power, half the board, half the empire. We run it together, in the light, with complete transparency and absolute equality. That is my counteroffer." Clara looked at the man standing before her. He had stripped away his ego, endured her wrath, fought by her side in the trenches, and was now offering her the keys to a billion-dollar kingdom simply because he recognized her worth. He wasn't trying to save her anymore. He was asking her to lead with him. A slow, breathtaking smile broke across Clara's face. The heavy armor she had worn for weeks finally fell away. Without breaking eye contact, Clara reached down to the desk. Her fingers grazed the crisp legal paper of the divorce petition. With a swift, fluid motion, she picked it up and ripped it cleanly in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter like snow into the wastebasket. She held out her left hand. Julian's breath hitched. With shaking fingers, he slid the gold band back onto her ring finger where it belonged. Clara grabbed the collar of his gray Henley shirt and pulled him in. The kiss was no longer a frantic, desperate thing. It was a collision of equals, fierce and passionate, a sealing of a true partnership forged in the fires of betrayal and rebuilt on a foundation of unshakable trust. When they finally broke apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers, a brilliant, relieved smile illuminating his face. "So, partner, how do you want to handle our first day back at the office?" Clara looked over his shoulder, out of the window toward the towering Manhattan skyline glittering in the distance. Her eyes flashed with the sharp, beautiful confidence of a woman who had just conquered the world. "First," Clara whispered, her smile turning predatory, "we fire everyone who ever laughed at your grandmother."
Clara proved that a true queen doesn't need a billionaire to save her. She can win the war all by herself. But what about you? If a billionaire lied to you about his identity to protect you, Would you tear up the divorce papers like Clara, or would you walk away forever? Let us know your choice in the comments below. If you love this story of karma, betrayal, and a badass female lead, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling billionaire romances. See you in the next story.